Hello and welcome. I'm Sevinj Osmanqizi, and today we're focusing on the highly anticipated Alaska meeting, a pivotal moment that could reshape regional power dynamics. And joining me is Mr. Paul Goble, a veteran analyst of Eurasian affairs, former US State Department official, and long-time observer of the South Caucasus and post-Soviet space. Mr. Goble, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the basics for those who haven't been following every headline like us. It's happening, very first Putin and Trump meeting since the start of Mr. Trump's second presidency. From your perspective, what should we be watching for?
Well, the three most important things about this meeting are first, that it happened at all, that after the attempts to isolate Russia and Putin following the Russian expanded invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, this is the first high-level meeting between Putin and any Western leader, and especially the leader of the United States. Second, it meets a demand that Vladimir Putin has wanted all along, namely to have Ukraine discussed without Ukraine being present. That Mr. Putin wants the Ukrainian situation to be solved as part of a general East-West agreement rather than negotiated in the first instance with the Ukrainian government. And he's, in a certain sense, got that, whatever the details that come out. And the third is that once you have a negotiation like this started, there's going to be concessions made, at least on the American side, in the hopes of getting an accord. And so, from Mr. Putin's point of view, the meeting itself is a major achievement, a major victory. What it will mean in terms of changes, there have been lots of speculations about what may come out of this meeting, but right now we're still in the midst of the sessions, and so it's presumptuous. It would be presumptuous to say what might happen. There are a variety of things that many expect, possibly some kind of ceasefire called for by the Americans and the Russians, possibly some kind of ending of or reduction of the Western sanctions regime on Russia, possibly a reduction in the number of American troops in NATO in Europe. Those are just three of the things that people are talking about may come out of this meeting. But it's going to be another 24 or 48 hours before we can speak definitively about what the meeting has produced. But we already know what the meeting means. Putin is no longer isolated. Putin has got the Americans to agree to talk about Ukraine without Ukraine being present. Even if Ukraine is brought in later, it's still going to be having been brought in after the Americans and Russians talk about it, which is in violation of what the United States has said in the past and what the Europeans continue to say. And it opens the way to a fair amount of horse trading on a variety of issues, where in the pursuit of getting some kind of Ukrainian settlement, which Mr. Trump is clearly interested in his quest to get a deal, a grand deal, probably will involve a number of American concessions of one kind or another. How far that will go, one doesn't know. But those three principles, if you will, were very clear once the meeting was announced, and now we have to wait until we get the details of the specifics of what the two leaders may have agreed to.
Did you see the Foreign Minister Lavrov's sweatshirt that apparently reads SSSR, USSR? I mean, please explain to us what's the mindset. What is it hint for?
Well, Mr. Lavrov is not always careful. He tends to speak expansively, and I'm sure that many people in the Kremlin still think as if the USSR, having existed, will exist again. I think the fact that this was done, in a certain sense, is a provocation. It's designed to see how the Americans will react, how the West will react to something like that. it certainly raises the worrying possibility that what Mr. Putin is doing in Ukraine has to be viewed as part of an effort by him and his government, not just to punish Ukraine for its looking to the West, but to reconstitute some kind of imperial state centered on Moscow. How far we go with that? There have been too many examples of Russian officials, including Foreign Minister Lavrov, doing things like this to say this means X. This could mean a variety of things. Again, we'll need to see what follows, and also what the Russian spokesman at the foreign ministry and elsewhere in Moscow will say.
Do you think that behind closed doors, actually President Trump said that, well, the spokesperson said that the meeting may go for 5-6 hours, but President Trump earlier said that he will need only a couple of minutes to know if there's going to be peace. So what do you think these hours will be about?
Well, first off, someone may get Mr. Trump may get a sense of what's going to be possible in the first few minutes, given the opening statements. That's the kind of seat of the pants judgment that Mr. Trump is famous for, in fact. But the issues that are before these two leaders are enormous. I mean, if we limit it only to Ukraine, it's an enormous set of issues. So what kind of a settlement would you have? Where would the borders be? What would be the rules of the game in terms of foreign military assistance to Ukraine? What kinds of side payments might the West make, such as reducing the American armed forces in Europe? Those are not things that are going to be solved in the first 2 minutes. Whatever Mr. Trump says, he will certainly get a sense from how Mr. Putin begins where things are going. But it's going to take a number of hours and the work of a lot of people to come up with anything approaching a settlement, as opposed to some declarations. So I saw that statement as being an expression of Mr. Trump's own favored approach of putting pressure on the other side by suggesting that unless you come out and show that you're willing to move in a positive direction from Mr. Trump's point of view, that this isn't going anywhere, and that throws the ball back into Putin's court, which is exactly the kind of negotiating strategy we've seen Mr. Trump adopt on other policy areas as well.
Do you think President Trump is defending Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity?
Well, he certainly says that he is. On the other hand, if he's prepared to engage in some kind of trade of land for peace, of handing significant portions of Ukraine over to the Russians as a way of bringing about a ceasefire and ultimately perhaps a peace settlement, I doubt very many Ukrainians, and certainly many friends of Ukraine, would describe that as defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We committed ourselves in the Budapest Memorandum some years ago that if Ukraine gave up the nuclear weapons, Soviet nuclear weapons that were on its territory, the United States would work to ensure that the borders of 1991 would be maintained. I don't think you can talk about land for peace and also say you're defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine. What probably Mr. Trump means by that is that he is interested in getting some kind of a settlement so that a Ukraine will continue to exist, but can hardly be expected, given Mr. Putin's position, will be a Ukraine in anything like the 1991 borders, given that Russia has already formally annexed not only Crimea, but parts of the Donbass. So what you have is a contradiction. On the one hand, yes, there have been statements coming out of Washington that we're interested in defending the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but there have been just as many statements about land for peace. And if you can't square that circle. I think Ukrainians and friends of Ukraine will decide that the Americans are really not committed to the territorial integrity of Ukraine as Ukraine understands it, which is the borders of 1991.
Former U.S. Ambassador Matthew Bryzer described the Alaska meeting as a modern time Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement or talks when the big powers decide the smaller nations. Would you agree with this description?
I would agree. I would say in some ways, this is even worse because the Molotov-Ribbentrop was signed with the secret protocols at a time when the armies weren't in the field and when the Western countries had been providing arms to that nation in the hopes that it could defend itself. And now we're talking about walking away from a people that has shown its commitment to fighting its way out. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was horrific. It may be that what we will see come out of this will be as bad or even worse.
So,
There is one big difference, and that is Molotov-Ribbentrop opened the way to World War II. The Ukrainians, I don't think, are going to stop struggling for their territorial integrity and the independence of their country, whatever agreements are signed, or declarations are made by Moscow and Washington. I think they will continue to fight. That's different. And for the Ukrainians will find themselves isolated from the United States, but they will not be isolated from Europeans. And so we're talking about walking away from a people and a nation and a government that we supported and are now not supporting. And if you go back and look at Molotov-Ribbentrop, you're not looking at that. You're not looking at either. These were two dictatorships in Molotov-Ribbentrop that were drawing lines on the map without regard to the population. It wasn't as if the Germans were saying, we'll hand over this to you, or the Soviets were saying, we'll hand over to this, despite the fact that we've been arming the people, despite the fact that they've been trying to defend themselves. In this case, if an agreement were tried to be imposed by Moscow and Washington without regard to the position of Ukrainians, it would in many ways be even worse than Ambassador Bryza describes it.
So, what do you think is the real goal of Washington in these talks? I mean, just a ceasefire, or what do you think?
I think the real goal of this is to show that the two leaders are in a position to talk to one another and to make deals. And I think that the summit meeting opens a variety of issues far broader than just Ukraine, and therefore we aren't going to know all the details right away. I think that Mr. Trump wants to be known as a peacekeeper. He's made no secret that he would like to get the Nobel Peace Prize. He wants to be known as a peacemaker. He believes that he has contributed to settlements elsewhere, and this would be a crowning joy, a jewel in the crown, as it were. It's at the same time, however, he's prepared, quite obviously, to engage Mr. Putin far more broadly on a whole range of issues. Putin's delighted about that because for the past 4 years, the West has taken the position we're not talking to somebody who's engaged in an aggressive war on its neighbor. Now, the leader of the West is doing exactly that. And there are a whole variety of issues that are on the table. The future of NATO force structure, the question of use of the Arctic, access to rare earth minerals. There's a long list. And so by having this meeting, Mr. Trump has opened that door which the Russians are delighted to have be opened because it gives them a chance to push their agenda in the hopes that the Americans will want to agree to part of it to get some of what they want. And so I think this is a major turning point, and it for countries like Ukraine, it's a worrying one. This is not the end of the story. This is the beginning of the story.
Now turn to the neighbors, Azerbaijan and Armenia. What do each of them, do you think, hope to achieve from this meeting? And given how the Washington summit concluded, do you believe that Putin is likely to try undermining its outcome?
To try to undermine the
Outcome of the Washington summit?
Azerbaijani-Armenian Accord.
Yes.
I think there's no question he's going to put pressure on both Baku and Yerevan. I think his ability to put pressure on Yerevan is probably greater, given the divisions in Armenian society. I would expect him to do no less. What we've seen President Aliyev of Azerbaijan do in the last couple of days tells us that he's aware that the pressure is going to be put, and so he's doing things that will parry that pressure. The most important was the release of a statement from Azerbaijan that Baku did not consider the shooting down of an Azerbaijani civilian aircraft as being intentional. That's a major concession. A second thing that Baku did this week was to reopen boat traffic, shipping traffic between Baku and Iran, given that Iran had been very much opposed to any agreement about some kind of corridor through Zengezur-Sunik. That is a way of pouring oil on troubled waters there. So is Moscow going to try to destabilize this? Of course it is. That's what it does. And is it going to send troops? I don't think so. I think it's going to use all the forms of hybrid power, propaganda, subversion, you name it. But I do think that the peace accord, the text of which we now have, although we don't have a date for its signature, and there are a whole bunch of issues that are not resolved by that agreement, goes a long way in setting the stage for a South Caucasus in which Russia is not the arbiter anymore, where the countries themselves are going to make decisions. And I think that the way in which President Aliyev has responded to Russian concerns, anger, whatever, shows just how skillful he's being in parrying that threat to him. Whether Yerevan can be equally skillful, I don't know. They have a much bigger problem.
Are you considering, Mr. President Aliyev saying that Russia down in Azerbaijani plain was not intentional to be a concession to Moscow? You quoting probably Fox News TV interview.
I'm citing that, which was to say that this was, an accidental, that it was not Moscow's order, that Moscow did not order
intentional.
This.
Yes,
that's the implication, and that means that while this is a terrible tragedy, while the Russians are to blame in the sense that they didn't maintain better command and control, that's very different than what many Azerbaijanis were saying earlier, that this was an intentional downing of an Azeri civilian aircraft by Russian forces to send a message. Baku has moved away from that position and to one that Moscow will see as very welcome. And I think that
concession, compromise.
It is a move towards some kind of a compromise. I would hope that we would see Moscow being more forthcoming in issuing an apology for this terrible tragedy, which came because a Russian missile was launched against an Azeri plane, that it's now being described by Baku as an as non-intentional. One
So
can
this is
say one can get away with a lot of things if one can get people to agree to that.
so it's premature given that the official investigation is not over and we don't know
I think it.
exactly what happened, whether it
I
was
think.
intentional or not.
Well, I think it's premature with respect to the investigation. I don't think it's premature, almost a year on, when you're talking about a very dynamic political situation. President Aliyev has to be worried about how Moscow will respond. If Moscow sees that Azerbaijan is prepared to be more forthcoming on that issue from Moscow's point of view, then that works to Baku's interests. That's my point. I'm not suggesting that the investigation should be wrapped up and that everything is fine. I'm just saying that saying things like that this week in particular is a significant political chess move, and it shows that President Aliyev is very aware that the Russians are going to put more pressure on Baku in the near term, and reopening the shipping line between Baku and Iranian ports is also going to be a major step forward, because it will calm Iran, which has also been calmed by a provision, one of the 17 points, that Armenia and Azerbaijan agree not to have forces from third countries on the borders of anything. So on their common border or on the border on this in this corridor. And I think those are all things that will make it more difficult for Russia to cause problems, not preclude them, but make it more difficult. And what President Aliyev is doing is countering or putting in place ideas that will put Baku in a better position to defend its interests.
I was going to ask you about the agreement that has been made public earlier
Right.
this week by both Azerbaijan and Armenian foreign ministries. Actually, one of the articles that you mentioned, the border, I believe it's either second or third article.
Right.
Why don't we start from there? How important do you think it is? And most importantly, how is it going to be implemented? Because currently...
Well, first off, it has to be signed. We don't know when it's going to be signed. The two leaders said that it was going to be signed soon. Soon, we'll see what that means. Second, the basic provisions are terribly important because they call on the two sides to recognize the 1991 borders, which requires constitutional change in Armenia, something Azerbaijan has demanded, and it would seem to preclude any further military action by one side or the other. Third, and I think this is what people are going to focus on, is that this treaty agreement was issued in three languages: Armenian, Azerbaijani, and English.
Correct.
It wasn't issued in Russian. The Russian versions are not official. We're talking about a world where two post-Soviet states reach a major agreement, and one of the official versions is not in Russian. That's an amazing change. That's almost unprecedented in the former Soviet space, and I think that people remember that. I was very pleased to see the provisions of the 17 articles. I think that many of them require fleshing out, but the non-aggression commitment to non-aggression, the announcement that after a certain time they will withdraw the various suits they have in international organizations against each other, the restoration of diplomatic relations with an Armenian embassy to open in Baku and an Azerbaijani embassy to open in Yerevan. Those are all very, very important steps. Are there some things that we don't know yet, that are the details that will have to be worked out? We still don't know exactly what passageway the corridor is going to go. We don't know which West American firm is going to be in place. We don't know what the relationship is going to be between that corridor and the so-called north-south corridor between Armenia and Russia further north and into Iran. We simply don't. And those are things that are going to have to be worked out. And so with a peace settlement, which we should, I think, celebrate, we have to recognize that it's going to be a long time with many issues still to be discussed before we can say we really have peace in our time in the South Caucasus.
Well, right after the signing the memorandum, President Aliyev, in his interview with Fox News, he said that the constitutional changes in Armenia still remain to be seen, and this signing of the final agreement will depend on that. So how does it change the situation time-wise?
Well,
Is that something?
First off, Armenia has committed to not making claims on Azerbaijani territory in public, in a document that the two sides have issued. While it hasn't been signed and ratified, that's a step forward. Do I believe that the Armenians will move relatively expeditiously to change their constitution? Yes, I do. It won't be as quick as a lot of people would like, simply because the Armenians don't have a dictatorship. They have a democracy, and there will be fights because there are a lot of people in Armenia who don't like the idea of dropping claims on Karabakh and who don't like the possibility that anyone, including the United States, will have some kind of corridor over Armenian territory. I would guess that we're still talking about several months before this is signed, although I could imagine having it signed sooner with the two sides simply committing, with Armenia committing itself to seeking the Armenian government committing itself to seeking the revision of the constitution in as expeditious way as possible. But I don't think Azerbaijan is likely to be willing to sign unless some language of that kind is present, or unless the constitution of Armenia has already been changed. And I think that's what President Aliyev of Azerbaijan was indicating in his interview.
What can you tell us about the U.S.-Azerbaijan agreement signed, and also a possibility of United States selling weapons to Azerbaijan? What does it mean for the parity?
Unlike the draft treaty that we have between Armenia and Azerbaijan, the American-Azerbaijani agreement is more declarative. It's talking about common working together, making these things possible. When one country says that it will sell weapons to another country, the next question is, what kind of weapons? Under what terms? There's a huge range of possibilities. That hasn't been specified. The timing hasn't been specified. The financing hasn't been specified. It's one thing when you give weapons. It's another thing when you expect people to pay for them. So my sense is the U.S.-Azeri agreement is a declaration of intent rather than an agreement that has anything that is comparable to what we see in the Armenian-Azerbaijani draft peace settlement. I don't see the big questions being answered yet. I think that the declarative language is something that Baku is happy to pocket, but what it will get exactly depends on a lot of things. And I don't see the agreement showing us exactly how those various issues will be resolved. There's a tendency whenever there's an agreement announced to try to run forward far beyond what we know. That happened after the 44-day war, when there was a joint declaration of the leaders of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and the Russian Federation. There were lots of people who were ready to say this is going to bring peace. Well, that didn't quite happen. It was a declaration of intent. My sense is that while I'm very pleased to see the language of the Armenian-Azerbaijani Accord, what I've seen so far coming out of the American-Azerbaijani agreement is that it's vastly more declarative of intent than it is of specific steps forward. We'll have to see.
Do you think that the recent military operation against Iran could make this possible, that Azerbaijan may be in a situation to defend itself?
Well,
So to need more weapons?
I think in my humble opinion, and I'm not a military expert, but in my opinion, Azerbaijan is quite capable of defending itself right now with the weapons it has and with its cooperation with Turkey. That doesn't mean that if Iran used other weapons than those it has used so far, that it wouldn't need help from the outside. It's certainly true that the United States and possibly Israel would be ready to help Azerbaijan if it faced that kind of threat. What I see is in President Aliyev's moves this week is an effort to reduce the possibility that that threat will be present. And so until you know what the threat will be, you can't specify how someone will react to it.
My final question about the Trump road for Sunik Zengezur, and how do you think President Putin may try to change what's at stake or what's at table right now?
The obvious thing is to try to destabilize Armenia, to try to overthrow the Pashinyan government, to launch major protests in Yerevan, drawing on the 100,000 ethnic Armenians who came out of Karabakh and who are not happy about the way the situation is. There are provocations that are possible. Russia has already expanded its presence at the its Gumri base inside Armenia. So there are lots of things it might do. It's certainly already pushing very hard propagandistically to portray this as a mistake and to suggest that Armenia is about to be swallowed up by the Turkic world, and that the only way to prevent that is to come back and be a partner with Russia. I'm not surprised that's being said, but I don't think it's going to be believed very much this time around by most people, although there may be enough in Yerevan itself that could pose a threat to the Pashinyan government.
So do you think that President Putin may request a role in this project for Russia?
He'll ask for a role. He isn't going to get one. He isn't going to get one right now. The two countries don't want it. Both Armenia and Azerbaijan are moving away from the Russian Federation. They believe they have support in the West, at least from the United States, as sufficient to not require a Russian role. The Russian role in the South Caucasus has always been deleterious. It's always been about playing one side off against the other. These two countries have decided they don't want that game played anymore. So why would they invite the Russians back? That the Russians want that, of course. That's what they've always wanted. But I don't see much any interest of that in Baku, and I don't see much interest of that in Yerevan either.
Mr. Paul Goble, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.